The champagne glass slipped from my fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor of what used to be our bedroom. There, scattered across Derek's nightstand like confetti from a celebration I wasn't invited to, were wedding venue brochures. Not for us. We'd been married for 3 years. These featured a different bride's name written in Natalie's distinctive handwriting. Mrs. Natalie Coleman. My best friend since college was planning to marry my husband, and judging by the circled dates, the ceremony was happening in 2 weeks. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stood frozen in the doorway, my work bag still clutched in my other hand, staring at the evidence of a betrayal so complete it felt like the ground beneath me had opened up. The brochures weren't even hidden. They were spread out carelessly, as if whoever left them there had stopped caring about secrecy. Or maybe they wanted me to find them. My phone buzzed. A text from Natalie. "Hey, babe. Coffee tomorrow? I have something exciting to tell you." The casual cruelty of it made my stomach turn. She was still pretending to be my friend while planning to steal my entire life. The foundation of my seemingly perfect life in Portland had been cracking for months, but I'd been too trusting to notice the warning signs. Derek and I had met at a marketing conference 5 years ago, two ambitious 20-somethings ready to conquer the advertising world together. He worked for a prestigious agency downtown while I built my own boutique marketing firm from scratch, specializing in local businesses and startups. We were the power couple everyone envied, successful, attractive, seemingly devoted to each other. Natalie had been my roommate at Oregon State, the kind of friend who knew all your secrets and shared all her dreams. She'd moved to Portland 2 years ago when her graphic design career stalled in Seattle, and I'd welcomed her with open arms. I even helped her get freelance work through my client network and let her crash in our guest room for 3 months while she found her footing. That guest room, I realize now with sickening clarity, had been the perfect launching pad for her to study our relationship, to learn Derek's habits, to position herself as the better option. The signs had been there, glaring in hindsight. Derek's sudden interest in yoga classes that coincidentally matched Natalie's schedule, his new appreciation for craft beer, specifically the obscure brands Natalie always raved about, the way he'd light up when she entered a room, becoming more animated and charming than he'd been with me in months. I'd attributed it to friendship, even felt grateful that my husband and best friend got along so well. Our marriage had settled into comfortable routine, which I'd mistaken for stability. Derek would leave for his agency job at 8 sharp, coffee travel mug in hand, while I worked from my home office, managing campaigns for local restaurants and boutiques. Evenings were predictable, takeout dinners while we scrolled through our phones, weekend plans that increasingly included Natalie as a third wheel. I thought we were building something solid. Instead, we'd created the perfect cover for their affair. The first real crack appeared 3 months ago during my birthday dinner. Derek had chosen the restaurant, insisting on a place I'd never heard of instead of my favorite Italian spot. When we arrived, Natalie was already there, claiming Derek had invited her as a surprise. The surprise was that the restaurant specialized in fusion cuisine that I didn't particularly enjoy, but that Natalie had been posting about for weeks. Throughout dinner, they shared inside jokes I wasn't part of and discussed movies they'd apparently watched together. When I mentioned feeling left out, Derek dismissed it as oversensitivity. The exclusion became more frequent after that. They'd grab lunch together without mentioning it until I saw their social media posts. Derek would come home with stories about conversations with Natalie that had happened during his lunch breaks, detailed discussions about her career struggles and romantic disappointments. When I pointed out that he seemed to be spending a lot of time counseling my friend, he accused me of being possessive and unsupportive of their friendship. My work began suffering as the tension at home increased. I'd built my marketing firm, Hayes Creative Solutions, through personal relationships and word-of-mouth referrals.
but maintaining those connections required focus and genuine enthusiasm that became harder to summon. Clients started noticing that my campaigns lacked their usual spark. The quirky coffee shop owner, who'd been my first major client, gently suggested that my recent social media strategies felt forced compared to my earlier work.
Derek's salary at the agency covered our mortgage and basic expenses, but my business income had paid for our extras, vacations, nice dinners, the small luxuries that made life enjoyable. As my client base dwindled, we had to cut back, which Derek resented more than I'd expected. He began making pointed comments about my hobby business not pulling its weight, conveniently forgetting that my hobby had funded our honeymoon to Europe and the down payment on our house. Natalie, meanwhile, seemed to be thriving. Her freelance design work was picking up, partly thanks to connections I'd helped her make, and she'd started dating someone new, or so she claimed. She was vague about the details, only mentioning that he was really special and that she was taking things slow because she didn't want to mess it up. Now I understood her secrecy. The special someone was my husband, and she was taking it slow because she was waiting for the right moment to destroy my marriage completely. The gaslighting intensified as their relationship deepened. Derek became critical of everything about me, my appearance, my ambitions, my personality. I was too focused on work, then not focused enough. I was clingy when I tried to spend time with him, distant when I gave him space. Every conversation became a minefield where I found myself apologizing for reactions that had once been perfectly normal. When I suggested couples counseling, he dismissed it as unnecessary drama, claiming I was creating problems where none existed. Natalie played her role perfectly, offering a shoulder to cry on whenever Derek and I fought. She'd listen sympathetically as I vented about his changed behavior, offering advice that seemed supportive but actually drove wedges deeper into our relationship. She suggested that maybe Derek was going through a midlife crisis, that I should give him more space to figure things out. She recommended books about revitalizing marriage that somehow made me feel more inadequate rather than empowered. Most insidiously, she began planting seeds of doubt about whether Derek and I were truly compatible, framing it as concern for my happiness. The manipulation was so subtle that I began questioning my own perceptions. Was I imagining the distance between Derek and me? Was I being paranoid about their friendship? Natalie had always been dramatically supportive of our relationship, gushing about how perfect we were together, how lucky I was to find such a great guy. Even as she was systematically dismantling our marriage, she maintained the facade of being my biggest cheerleader. Looking back, I can pinpoint the exact moment when their affair moved from emotional to physical. Derek came home from a work conference in Seattle with an energy I hadn't seen in months. He was affectionate, attentive, almost giddy with some private joy. I thought the time away had reminded him of what we had together. The truth was more devastating. Natalie had driven up to Seattle that weekend, supposedly to visit old friends, and they'd spent 2 days together in his hotel room while I held down the fort at home, even watering her plants and feeding her cat like the devoted friend I thought I was. The secret weekend getaway emboldened them. Suddenly, Derek had frequent after-work obligations, client dinners, industry networking events, team-building activities that seemed to exclusively happen on nights when Natalie was also mysteriously unavailable. They were getting sloppy with their lies, or maybe they were getting tired of sneaking around. The wedding brochures, scattered on Derek's nightstand, suggested they'd decided to stop hiding altogether. My hands shook as I picked up the scattered papers, each one a nail in the coffin of my old life. The venues were all upscale Portland locations I recognized from other weddings I'd attended, as Derek's wife. The irony was staggering. They were planning to celebrate their union in the same city where they destroyed mine, probably inviting the same circle of friends who knew me, who'd watched my marriage crumble without understanding why. One brochure caught my attention, the Sentinel Hotel, where Derek and I had spent our wedding night 3 years ago. They weren't just stealing my husband, they were rewriting our entire history, claiming our most sacred moments as their own. The date circled in red ink was 2 weeks away, a Saturday in late September when the Portland weather would be perfect for an outdoor ceremony. I heard Derek's key in the front door downstairs and quickly shoved the brochures back where I'd found them.
My mind raced as his footsteps climbed the stairs, each step bringing him closer to a confrontation I wasn't ready for. How long had they been planning this? Did they expect me to simply disappear once I discovered their betrayal? Or were they counting on my shock and devastation to keep me paralyzed while they moved forward with their new life? "Hey, babe, you're home early," Derek called out, his voice carrying that false casualness I'd learned to dread. He appeared in the doorway, loosening his tie with the same gesture that had once made my heart skip. Now it just reminded me of all the times he probably loosened that tie in hotel rooms with Natalie. "Client meeting got canceled," I managed, proud of how steady my voice sounded despite the chaos in my chest. "How was your day?"
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Same old boring stuff, he replied, moving to his nightstand to check his phone. His hand hovered over the spot where the brochures lay hidden beneath the magazine, and I saw the moment he realized he'd left evidence exposed. His eyes darted to mine, searching for signs that I had discovered his secret. I kept my expression neutral, pretending to sort through mail from the dresser. Let him wonder. Let him sweat. For the first time in months, I held the advantage of knowledge, and I wasn't going to waste it on a premature confrontation that would only give them time to craft better lies. "I'm meeting Natalie for drinks later," Derek announced, the casual tone not quite masking his defensiveness. "Some crisis at work she needs to talk through." "Of course she does," I replied mildly. "Tell her I said hi." He studied my face suspiciously, clearly expecting jealousy or accusations that didn't come. My unexpected calm seemed to unnerve him more than tears would have. Good. Let him wonder what I knew and what I was planning. The truth was, I had no plan yet, just a growing determination that I wouldn't go down quietly. After Derek left for his work crisis with my best friend, I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the artifacts of a life that had been built on lies. Wedding photos smiled down from the mantelpiece, capturing a happiness that felt like it belonged to someone else. The throw pillows Natalie had helped me pick out for the couch suddenly seemed like markers of her territory, subtle ways she'd been inserting herself into my home and marriage from the beginning. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Lauren Kim, one of the few people in my life who wasn't connected to Derek or Natalie. "Wine night tomorrow? You've seemed stressed lately, and I have good gossip." Lauren was a photographer who traveled frequently for work, which meant she was outside the Portland social bubble where everyone knew everyone else's business. She'd been my college roommate before Natalie, and we'd maintained a friendship built on brutal honesty and unconditional support. I typed back, "Yes, desperately need wine and perspective. Your place?" Her immediate response, "Already chilling the bottles." Fair warning, if Derek is being a jerk, I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. Lauren's directness was exactly what I needed. While Natalie had spent months subtly undermining my confidence and gaslighting me about my marriage, Lauren would give me the unfiltered truth, even if it hurt. Especially if it hurt. Sometimes clarity required pain, and I was finally ready to face whatever ugly realities I'd been avoiding. The next morning brought another text from Natalie. "Rain check on coffee? Something came up at work." The lying had become so effortless for her that she probably didn't even register the deception anymore. I wondered if she felt any guilt about betraying someone who'd loved and trusted her completely, or if she rationalized it as inevitable, even deserved. Instead of dwelling on their betrayal, I decided to use my unexpected free morning productively. I drove to my favorite coffee shop in the Alberta Arts District, a space where I'd conceived some of my best marketing campaigns, and where the owner, Marcus Rivera, had become both a client and a friend. His coffee shop, Melody's Grind, was more than just a place to grab caffeine. It was a community hub where local musicians showcased their talents and creative professionals gathered to collaborate. Marcus was behind the counter when I walked in, his usual warm smile brightening when he saw me. He was a few years older than me, with laugh lines that spoke of someone who genuinely enjoyed life and the people in it. He'd opened Melody's Grind 5 years ago as a tribute to his late sister, a jazz singer whose photo graced the wall behind the espresso machine. The story of his sister's dreams deferred and ultimately cut short had inspired him to create a space where other artists could pursue their passions while building community. "The usual, Tori?" he asked, already reaching for the Ethiopian beans he knew I preferred. "Or do you need something stronger today?"
You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders." His perception caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on maintaining my facade at home that I'd forgotten how it felt to be around someone who actually paid attention to my emotional state without ulterior motives. "Make it a double," I said, settling onto one of the mismatched stools at the counter. "And maybe some of that brutal honesty you're famous for." Marcus raised an eyebrow as he worked the espresso machine with practiced efficiency.
That sounds ominous. Derek troubles? The fact that he immediately identified the source of my stress said more about the state of my marriage than I cared to admit. I'd been coming here for 3 years, and Marcus had watched me transform from an enthusiastic newlywed to someone who looked increasingly drained with each visit. "How obvious is it?" I asked, accepting the perfectly crafted latte he slid across the counter. "Put it this way," Marcus said gently. "You used to light up when you talked about your projects, your plans, your life. Lately, you look like you're just going through the motions. That's not the Tory who convinced me to let a marketing firm owner become my friend instead of just my service provider." His words hit harder than I expected because they confirmed what I'd been afraid to acknowledge. I'd lost myself somewhere in the wreckage of my marriage. The confident woman who'd built a successful business and pursued her passions had been slowly erased by months of gaslighting and emotional manipulation. "What would you do," I asked carefully, "if you discovered that people you trusted completely had been lying to you for months, planning something that would destroy your life while pretending to care about your well-being?" Marcus set down the towel he'd been using to clean the counter and gave me his full attention. "That's not a hypothetical question, is it?" I shook my head, suddenly fighting back tears I'd been holding in since finding those wedding brochures. "First," he said quietly, "I'd remind myself that their choices reflect who they are, not who I am. Second, I'd make sure I had all the facts before deciding how to respond. And third, I'd remember that sometimes the worst betrayals are actually gifts. They show you who people really are and free you from relationships that were built on lies." His words resonated in a way that Natalie's manufactured sympathy never had. There was no agenda behind his advice, no hidden motive to manipulate my response. Just honest perspective from someone who'd faced his own share of heartbreak and rebuilding. The hardest part, I admitted, is realizing how completely I was fooled. How did I miss something so obvious? "Because you loved them," Marcus replied simply. "Love makes us generous in our interpretations, willing to believe the best even when evidence suggests otherwise. That's not a character flaw, Tori. That's what makes you someone worth knowing." For the first time in months, I felt seen and valued for who I was, rather than criticized for who I wasn't. The contrast with my interactions with Derek and Natalie couldn't have been clearer. We talked for another hour, our conversation ranging from the practical aspects of confronting betrayal to the bigger questions about rebuilding trust and identity after deception. Marcus shared stories from his own past, including the business partner who tried to steal his sister's musical compositions after her death, and the girlfriend who'd pretended to support his dream while secretly discouraging investors from backing his coffee shop. "The thing about betrayal," he said as other customers began filtering in for the lunch rush, "is that it's traumatic in the moment, but clarifying in the long run. Once you see someone's true character, you can't unsee it. That knowledge becomes power even when it hurts." I left Melody's Grind feeling more centered than I had in months, with Marcus's business card in my pocket and a promise to return soon. He had written his personal number on the back with a note, "For when you need someone who sees your worth clearly." The gesture wasn't romantic. Marcus had always been professionally appropriate in our interactions, but it represented something I'd been missing: genuine friendship without hidden agendas. The contrast with Natalie's manipulative support couldn't have been clearer. That evening, I met Lauren at her loft apartment in the Pearl District, a space that reflected her artistic sensibility with exposed brick walls covered in her photography and vintage furniture that told stories from her travels. "Okay," Lauren said, settling cross-legged on her oversized couch with a glass of red wine. "Talk to me. What's going on with Derek? And please don't tell me everything's fine, because I've known you too long to buy that performance." The floodgates opened.
I told her everything. The months of gaslighting, the suspicious behavior, the way Natalie had positioned herself as both confidant and saboteur, and finally, the discovery of the wedding brochures. Lauren listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each revelation. "Those absolute bastards," she said when I finished, her usually composed demeanor replaced by protective fury. "Tori, this isn't just cheating. This is psychological warfare. They've been systematically destroying your sense of reality while pretending to care about your well-being."
Hearing the situation summarized so starkly was both validating and devastating. I hadn't been imagining the manipulation or overreacting to normal relationship challenges. I'd been the target of a calculated campaign designed to break down my confidence and make me accept my own disposal. "The wedding is in 2 weeks," I said, staring into my wine glass. Part of me wants to confront them now, but another part wants to see how far they'll take this charade. Lauren leaned forward, her photographer's eyes studying my face with the same intensity she brought to capturing perfect shots. "What do you want the outcome to be? Do you want to try to save your marriage, or are you already done?" The question forced me to examine feelings I'd been avoiding. 3 months ago, I would have fought to save my relationship with Derek, convinced that our problems were fixable with better communication and renewed effort. Now, after seeing how easily he'd lied to me and how little he'd valued our vows, I felt nothing but disgust for the man I'd married. "I'm done," I admitted aloud for the first time. Not just with Derek, but with this entire life we built together. I want to disappear completely and start over somewhere they can never find me. "Then let's make that happen," Lauren said, with the decisiveness that made her such a successful photographer. "But first, let's make sure you have everything you need to protect yourself legally and financially." We spent the rest of the evening planning my exit strategy. Lauren had connections throughout the creative industry from her years of travel photography, including several opportunities in cities far from Portland. Nashville kept coming up in our conversation, a place with a thriving music and art scene where my marketing skills would be valuable and where nobody knew my history. "I have a friend there who runs an independent record label," Lauren explained, pulling up contact information on her phone. "She's always looking for marketing professionals who understand creative industries. It's not Portland, but it might be exactly what you need." As I drove home that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: excitement about my future. The betrayal still hurt, but it was beginning to transform into fuel for the dramatic change my life apparently needed. Derek and Natalie had unknowingly given me the push I needed to escape a situation that was slowly killing my spirit. The house was dark when I arrived. Derek, presumably still out with my former best friend, planning their secret wedding. I went straight to my home office and began the work of disentangling my life from theirs, starting with separating our finances and gathering the documents I'd need for a fresh start. Tomorrow, I would call Lauren's contact in Nashville. By the time Derek and Natalie exchanged vows, I would be gone, leaving them to enjoy their victory in an empty house with a forwarding address they'd never receive. The woman who'd been so easily deceived was about to become someone else entirely, someone stronger, smarter, and impossible to manipulate. They had no idea what they'd unleashed. The rain hammered against my windshield as I crossed the Oregon-Idaho border, each mile putting more distance between me and the wreckage of my old life. My Honda Civic was packed to the brim with everything I could fit after liquidating my existence in Portland. The rest, our furniture, our wedding china, the life we'd built together, I'd left for Derek to figure out along with the divorce papers my attorney had served him that morning. I'd moved with surgical precision once Lauren connected me with Melody Hartwell, owner of Crossroads Records in Nashville. One phone call had turned into a video interview, which had turned into a job offer and a promise that someone would meet me at Nashville's airport with keys to a furnished apartment. The music industry moved fast when they found someone they wanted, and apparently my portfolio of work with Portland's creative community had impressed people who mattered. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was fleeing to Music City while Derek and Natalie planned their wedding at venues I helped them scout during happier times. By now, Derek would have discovered my note, a single sentence typed on our computer. Enjoy your new life together. No forwarding address, no dramatic accusations, no begging for explanations I already understood too well. My phone had been buzzing incessantly for the first 6 hours of driving, Derek's calls mixed with increasingly frantic texts from Natalie. I'd powered it off somewhere outside Boise, Idaho, cutting the final thread connecting me to people who never deserved my loyalty. The silence felt liberating rather than lonely.
Others had been less gracious, but their opinions mattered less than my survival. The hardest part had been saying goodbye to Marcus without explaining the full truth. He'd sensed something significant was happening when I stopped by Melody's Grind for the last time, bringing him a bottle of wine and a thank you card for his friendship during my darkest period. "Nashville's lucky to get you," he'd said, studying my face with that perceptive gaze that missed nothing. "Something tells me this move is going to be the making of you." His faith in my future had meant more than he could know. When everyone else in my life had been lying or manipulating me, Marcus had simply seen my worth and reflected it back, without agenda. That gift of authentic friendship would carry me through whatever challenges waited ahead. Lauren had driven me to the airport, insisting on seeing me off despite my protests that goodbyes were too emotional for my fragile composure. She'd pressed a care package into my hands, snacks for the flight, a playlist titled Songs for Starting Over, and a leather journal with my initials embossed on the cover. "For documenting your comeback," she had explained, hugging me tightly at the security checkpoint, "because this story is going to have an incredible second act." Now, somewhere in the mountains of Eastern Oregon, I allowed myself to believe she might be right. The woman who'd discovered those wedding brochures felt like someone I'd known long ago before I learned what real strength looked like. The woman driving toward Nashville was someone entirely new, forged in betrayal but tempered by determination. Nashville's skyline appeared through morning mist as I crested a hill, the city sprawling along the Cumberland River like a promise of possibilities. The sight triggered unexpected emotion, not sadness for what I'd left behind, but anticipation for what lay ahead. This wasn't just geographical relocation, it was resurrection. Melody Hartwell met me at the Crossroads Records office, a converted warehouse in the Gulch District that thrummed with creative energy. She was a tiny woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing, dressed in vintage band t-shirts and jeans that had clearly seen every major venue in the city. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine, and her first words put me immediately at ease. "So you're the marketing wizard Lauren keeps raving about," she said, leading me through space filled with recording equipment, promotional posters, and musicians tuning instruments in every corner. "Welcome to the organized chaos that keeps Nashville's independent music scene alive." The tour revealed a company that operated more like a creative collective than a traditional business. Artists collaborated freely, sharing resources and expertise across genres. The marketing department consisted of 2 overworked specialists and a growing pile of projects that needed strategic attention. My role would be expanding their reach beyond Nashville's city limits, developing campaigns that could compete with major label marketing budgets through creativity and authentic storytelling. "Most of our artists have incredible talent, but limited resources," Melody explained, as we watched a blues guitarist recording vocals in a sound booth. "Your job is figuring out how to make them impossible to ignore without spending money we don't have." The challenge excited me more than any project I'd tackled in Portland. These weren't coffee shops or boutiques looking for incremental growth. These were artists betting their entire futures on the dream that their music could connect with audiences who'd never heard their names. The stakes were higher, but so was the potential for creating something meaningful. My apartment was a studio in the Music Row area, walking distance from the office, and surrounded by the studios where country music legends had recorded their greatest hits. The space was small, but thoughtfully furnished, with exposed brick walls and large windows that let in Nashville's golden afternoon light. Most importantly, it was mine alone. No shared history, no reminders of betrayal, just a clean slate waiting for me to define who I was becoming.
The first month passed in a blur of orientation and observation. I studied Nashville's music ecosystem with the intensity of an anthropologist, learning the difference between the commercial country scene on Music Row and the grittier Americana artists in East Nashville. Each genre had its own venues, its own media contacts, its own influential gatekeepers who could make or break a career with a single recommendation. My Portland experience with independent businesses translated surprisingly well to the music industry. Musicians faced the same challenges as small business owners: limited budgets, difficulty standing out in crowded markets, and the need to build authentic connections with their audiences. The skills I developed helping restaurants and boutiques find their voice could serve artists trying to cut through Nashville's competitive noise. My first major project was launching a folk duo called Midnight Revival. Two sisters from rural Kentucky whose harmonies could make audiences weep, but whose online presence barely registered beyond their hometown. Their music deserved national attention, but their previous attempts at self-promotion had been scattered and ineffective. I spent weeks with them, learning their story and understanding what made their music special. They'd grown up singing in their grandfather's church, developing a sound that blended traditional gospel with contemporary folk storytelling. Their lyrics addressed themes of family, faith, and the changing American South with an honesty that felt increasingly rare in commercial country music. The campaign I developed focused on authentic storytelling rather than polished glamour. We created a video series documenting their songwriting process, filmed in locations that reflected their Kentucky roots. Instead of expensive studio photography, we used natural light and genuine moments that captured their connection as sisters and artists.
The budget was minimal, but the emotional impact was undeniable. Social media engagement exploded within weeks of launch. Music blogs that had never heard of Midnight Revival began featuring their songs. Radio programmers in markets beyond Nashville started requesting their music. Most significantly, they booked their first tour outside Kentucky, a string of shows that would introduce their music to audiences across the Southeast. "You've given us hope," one of the sisters told me after their first sold-out show in Atlanta. "For the first time, we believe our music can reach people who need to hear it." Their success established my reputation within Nashville's independent music community faster than I dared hope. Word traveled quickly in a city where everyone was connected by 1 or 2 degrees of separation. Other artists began requesting my services, and Melody started assigning me the company's most challenging projects. The work was demanding, but fulfilling in ways my Portland business had never achieved. Every campaign had the potential to change someone's life, to transform talented unknowns into artists who could support themselves through their creativity. The stakes made every decision matter, every campaign a chance to prove that authentic storytelling could compete with corporate marketing budgets. My personal life remained deliberately simple during those first months. I focused entirely on establishing my professional reputation and exploring my new city. Nashville's neighborhoods each had distinct personalities, from the trendy restaurants in the Gulch to the dive bars in East Nashville, where you could discover your next favorite band on any given Tuesday night. I became a regular at several venues, not as someone looking for social connections, but as a music lover, studying how audiences responded to different artists. The research helped my campaigns, but it also reconnected me with the pure joy of discovering great music. In Portland, I'd been too absorbed in my failing marriage to pursue interests that didn't include Derek. Nashville was teaching me who I was when nobody's opinion mattered. The loneliness I'd expected never materialized. My days were filled with interesting projects and creative challenges. Evenings were spent at concerts, exploring neighborhoods, or working on campaigns that required deep focus. For the first time in years, I felt completely present in my own life rather than performing for an audience that didn't appreciate the show. My divorce was finalized remotely, Derek's attorney handling the paperwork while I rebuilt my identity 3 states away. We'd had few shared assets to divide and no children to complicate the separation. The legal dissolution of our marriage felt anticlimactic compared to the emotional work of moving forward, but it provided official closure to a chapter I'd already ended in my heart. Lauren visited for a long weekend in November.
marveling at my transformation as I showed her around Nashville's music venues and introduced her to the artists I'd been working with. Her photographer's eye documented my new life with the same care she brought to her professional assignments, creating a visual record of my reinvention. "You look like yourself again," she observed over drinks at a rooftop bar overlooking the Cumberland River. "Not the version of yourself you thought other people wanted to see, but the real Tori who had dreams and opinions and wasn't afraid to take up space in the world." Her words crystallized something I'd been feeling but hadn't articulated. The confident woman I'd been before Derek and Natalie's manipulation was emerging stronger than before, tempered by experience but not broken by betrayal. Nashville hadn't just given me a new job, it had given me permission to become fully myself again. The holidays passed without the emotional devastation I'd anticipated. Christmas in Nashville meant staying busy with year-end campaigns and discovering how the music community celebrated together. New Year's Eve brought a party at Crossroads Records where artists performed impromptu sets and industry professionals made optimistic predictions about the coming year. As midnight approached, I found myself on the warehouse's roof deck, looking out over a city that had welcomed me during my lowest point and helped me discover strengths I didn't know I possessed. The woman who'd fled Portland in desperate escape had evolved into someone who belonged here, who contributed meaningfully to a community that valued her skills and respected her judgment. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus back in Portland. "Happy New Year, Tori. Hope you're building something beautiful out there." His message was the only contact I'd maintained with my old life, a friendship that had transcended geography because it had been built on genuine respect rather than convenience or manipulation. Spring brought my biggest challenge yet, developing a marketing strategy for Crossroads Records' first major festival, a 3-day event showcasing independent artists from across the Southeast. The project would either establish the company as a serious player in Nashville's competitive landscape or exhaust resources on an ambitious gamble that didn't pay off. Melody gave me complete creative control, trusting my vision even when it diverged from traditional festival marketing approaches. Instead of focusing on headlining acts, I positioned the event as a discovery experience where music lovers could find their next favorite artist. The campaign emphasized authentic music community over celebrity culture, appealing to audiences hungry for genuine artistry. The marketing strategy incorporated everything I'd learned about Nashville's music ecosystem. Social media content featured behind-the-scenes glimpses of artists preparing for the festival. Local media relationships I'd cultivated led to feature stories about the festival's mission.
Strategic partnerships with independent venues created cross-promotional opportunities that expanded our reach without stretching the budget. Ticket sales exceeded projections within the first month. Music industry professionals from major labels and booking agencies requested credentials. National music publications began covering the festival as an important showcase for emerging talent. What had started as a local event was becoming a destination that could attract visitors from across the country. The pressure was intense, but exhilarating. Every aspect of the campaign reflected decisions I'd made, strategies I'd developed, relationships I'd built. Success would validate my belief that authentic marketing could compete with big-budget corporate campaigns. Failure would undermine the reputation I'd worked to establish in Nashville's tight-knit music community. As the festival approached, I realized how completely my life had changed. The anxious, manipulated woman who'd discovered wedding brochures on her husband's nightstand felt like a character from someone else's story. The confident marketing professional orchestrating a major music festival was who I'd always been underneath the layers of others' expectations and manipulations. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but it had been complete. Derek and Natalie had unknowingly freed me from a life that was slowly suffocating my authentic self. Their betrayal had been the catalyst for discovering what I was capable of when nobody was undermining my confidence or questioning my worth.
Nashville's music community had embraced me, not because I fit some predetermined mold, but because I brought skills and perspectives that added value to their collective efforts. The relationships I'd built were based on mutual respect and shared commitment to supporting independent artistry. Nobody here knew about my humiliating divorce or the friends who'd betrayed me, and their absence from my history made me stronger rather than diminished. The festival was still months away, but I was already planning beyond it, envisioning how Crossroads Records could expand its influence and how my role could evolve to match my growing ambitions. Nashville had given me the space to rediscover my professional capabilities, but it had also awakened entrepreneurial dreams that had been dormant during my marriage. For the first time since leaving Portland, I allowed myself to wonder what Derek and Natalie were doing with their stolen happiness. Had their wedding been everything they'd planned? Were they living in the house we'd shared, surrounded by furniture that held memories of our failed marriage? Did they ever think about the woman they'd driven away, or had they simply erased me from their narrative as completely as I'd erased them from mine? The questions no longer carried emotional charge. They were artifacts of curiosity about people who'd briefly intersected with my story, but no longer had the power to influence its direction. Their choices had revealed their character. My choices were revealing mine. The contrast would only become more stark as time passed and our paths continued diverging. Standing on my apartment balcony as Nashville settled into evening, I felt profound gratitude for the betrayal that had seemed so devastating 18 months ago. Without their cruelty, I might have stayed trapped in a marriage that was slowly killing my spirit, surrounded by people who saw me as supporting cast in their more important stories. Instead, I was building something meaningful in a city that celebrated authenticity and hard work. The woman Derek had discarded for someone better was becoming someone neither of them could have imagined. Truly independent, professionally successful, and completely free from their toxic influence. The best revenge, I was learning, wasn't making them suffer for their choices. It was becoming so completely fulfilled by my authentic life that their betrayal transformed from devastating loss into unexpected gift. They'd wanted me gone so they could claim my place in the life we'd built together. Instead, they'd launched me toward a life that was entirely my own, one they could never touch or diminish. That realization felt like the final piece of healing I'd needed. The next phase of my Nashville story could begin from a place of strength rather than recovery, ambition rather than escape. Whatever came next would be built on the foundation of who I really was, not who others had tried to make me become. The festival exceeded every projection we dared to make. 3 days of sold-out performances, industry executives discovering new talent, and media coverage that positioned Crossroads Records as Nashville's most innovative independent label. Standing backstage on the final night, watching Midnight Revival perform to an audience of 5,000 people who sang along to songs they'd learned that weekend, I felt the magnitude of what we'd accomplished together. Melody found me during the closing act, her face glowing with exhaustion and triumph. "The booking agents are already asking about next year," she said, pressing a champagne flute into my hands. "Rolling Stone wants to interview you about independent music marketing, and I have a proposition that's going to change everything." The proposition turned out to be a partnership offer that would reshape my entire career trajectory. Melody wanted to expand Crossroads Records into a full-service entertainment company, with divisions handling artist management, concert promotion, and brand partnerships. She wanted me to head the new marketing division as an equal partner, with equity stake and complete creative control over our campaigns. She explained over breakfast the morning after the festival ended,
But I think you're capable of something even bigger. What if we could scale that approach across the entire industry? The offer was everything I hadn't dared dream when I'd fled Portland 2 years earlier. Not just a job, but ownership in something I was helping build. Not just financial security, but the chance to reshape how independent music was marketed to the world. The scared woman who discovered wedding brochures on her husband's nightstand couldn't have imagined this moment.
but the confident professional who'd orchestrated a successful music festival was ready for the challenge. Accepting the partnership required legal negotiations that stretched over several weeks. I hired my own attorney, a sharp woman named Rebecca Chen, who specialized in entertainment law and who made sure my interests were protected in every clause. The contrast with my divorce proceedings was stark. This time, I was entering a business arrangement as an equal, with my value clearly recognized and my contributions properly compensated. The expanded Crossroads Entertainment launched 6 months later with a roster of 23 artists and a staff that had tripled in size. My marketing division occupied the entire second floor of our new headquarters, a renovated recording studio in East Nashville that had once housed legendary sessions with Johnny Cash and Patsy Cline. The history of the building felt appropriate for a company dedicated to supporting the next generation of musical storytellers. My first major project as partner was developing a comprehensive marketing strategy for Jake Morrison, a songwriter whose career had stalled despite critical acclaim and devoted fan base. His previous label had dropped him after disappointing album sales, leaving him questioning whether his deeply personal songwriting style could find commercial success in Nashville's increasingly polished market. Jake's music reminded me of myself, authentic, vulnerable, and slightly damaged by experiences that had taught hard lessons about trust and resilience. His songs explored themes of heartbreak, redemption, and the search for belonging with a raw honesty that connected deeply with audiences who'd lived through similar struggles. The challenge was expanding his reach beyond the devoted core fans who already understood his genius. I spent weeks studying Jake's catalog and understanding what made his music special. His lyrics operated on multiple levels, offering accessible emotional truths that revealed deeper meanings with repeated listening. His melodies combined classic country storytelling with contemporary folk influences, creating songs that felt timeless rather than trendy. Most importantly, his performances carried authentic emotion that couldn't be manufactured or faked. The marketing campaign I developed positioned Jake as Nashville's premier songwriter for grown-ups, an artist who addressed real-life complexity rather than romanticized fairy tales. Instead of chasing radio play that might compromise his artistic integrity, we focused on building sustainable career momentum through strategic touring, streaming platform features, and partnerships with brands that shared his values of authenticity and craftsmanship. Social media content showcased Jake's songwriting process, revealing the stories behind songs that had helped fans through their own difficult periods. We arranged acoustic performances in intimate venues where his emotional connection with audiences was undeniable. Music journalists, who dismissed his previous work as too introspective, began writing feature stories about his evolution as an artist and storyteller. The breakthrough came when a television drama licensed one of Jake's songs for a pivotal scene involving a character's emotional awakening after divorce. The song, Starting Over at 35, captured the terror and exhilaration of rebuilding life after everything you thought you knew had been proven wrong. The show's audience response was overwhelming, driving streaming numbers beyond anything Jake had achieved with traditional promotion. Suddenly, record labels that had previously ignored Jake were calling with contract offers. Booking agents who'd considered his draw too limited were offering tour opportunities in major markets. Music supervisors were requesting his entire catalog for potential licensing deals. The authentic emotional connection that had been considered commercially limiting was now recognized as his greatest asset. "You understood something about my music that I'd forgotten," Jake told me during a celebration dinner after his first sold-out show in Los Angeles. "You reminded me that connecting with people who really need to hear these songs is more valuable than appealing to everyone." His success established my reputation as someone who could revive stalled careers by helping artists reconnect with their authentic voice. Other managers began bringing me their most challenging cases: talented performers who'd been dropped by major labels, songwriters whose work was too sophisticated for commercial country radio, and veteran musicians whose careers needed strategic reinvention for contemporary audiences. Each project taught me more about the intersection of artistry and commerce, the delicate balance between maintaining creative integrity and building sustainable careers. The work was demanding, but deeply satisfying, offering daily proof that meaningful art could find its audience when presented with strategic intelligence and genuine respect for both the artist and their potential fans. My personal life began expanding as my professional confidence solidified. Nashville's music community was small enough that success created opportunities for genuine friendships with people who shared my values and interests. I joined a running group that included other music industry professionals, started taking guitar lessons from a retired session musician who lived in my building, and began hosting monthly dinner parties where artists and industry people could connect outside formal business settings. The dinner parties became legendary in our small circle, known for excellent food, eclectic guest lists, and conversations that often led to unexpected collaborations. Musicians would meet managers who understood their vision, songwriters would connect with artists looking for material that matched their evolving sound, and industry veterans would share wisdom with newcomers still learning to navigate Nashville's complex ecosystem. My personal life remained empty of romance by deliberate choice. The betrayal I had experienced in Portland had left me cautious about romantic vulnerability, and my focus on building Crossroads Entertainment left little emotional energy for dating. Several men had expressed interest, including Jake Morrison, whose gratitude had evolved into obvious attraction, but I wasn't ready to risk the peace I'd found in my independent life. That changed unexpectedly during a songwriting retreat Crossroads Entertainment organized in the mountains outside Nashville. The event brought together 12 artists for a weekend of collaboration and creative exchange, with industry professionals available for feedback and guidance. I was there as both organizer and participant, having started writing songs as a creative outlet that complemented my marketing work.
Among the attendees was Cameron Wells, a producer and musician whose work I'd admired but never met personally. He'd built his reputation working with independent artists who valued creative freedom over commercial formula, crafting albums that showcased authentic artistry without sacrificing production quality. His own musical background included classical training and years touring with various bands before he'd found his calling behind the mixing board. Cameron was nothing like Derek in appearance or personality. Where Derek had been conventionally handsome with carefully managed charm, Cameron was quietly attractive with genuine warmth that drew people into conversation without effort. His questions about artists' creative processes revealed deep understanding of the vulnerable courage required to share personal truth through music. Most appealingly, he seemed completely unaware of his own magnetism, focused entirely on helping others achieve their artistic goals. Our first real conversation happened during a late-night writing session, when most other participants had retired to their cabins. I was struggling with a song about starting over, unable to find lyrics that captured the complexity of rebuilding identity after betrayal without wallowing in victimhood. Cameron had been working on piano arrangements nearby, occasionally offering gentle suggestions when I seemed stuck. "What if the song isn't about what they took from you," he suggested during a particularly frustrating moment, "but about what you discovered you could build without them?" The reframe unlocked something in both the song and my understanding of my own journey. The lyrics that emerged explored themes of unexpected strength, the joy of authentic self-expression, and gratitude for painful experiences that had led to better destinations. Cameron's piano arrangements supported the emotional arc perfectly, creating space for vulnerability while building toward triumphant resolution. We worked together until dawn, crafting a song that felt like the most honest thing I'd ever created. The collaboration was effortless, but electric. Our creative instincts complementing each other in ways that produced something neither of us could have achieved alone. When we finally played the finished song for the other retreat participants, the response was immediate and powerful. "You two need to write an entire album together," declared Sarah Mitchell, a veteran songwriter whose opinion carried significant weight in Nashville circles. "That song captured something most of us spend our entire careers trying to express." Cameron and I exchanged glances that acknowledged the undeniable creative connection we'd discovered, but also the complexity of what that might mean. Professional collaborations in Nashville's music community often led to romantic entanglements that could complicate business relationships if they ended badly. We were both successful enough to risk potential awkwardness, but cautious enough to proceed carefully. The drive back to Nashville provided opportunity for the conversation we'd been avoiding. Cameron was recently divorced, his marriage having ended when his ex-wife decided she preferred the idea of being married to a successful music producer, rather than the reality of supporting someone whose work required irregular hours and constant availability for creative emergencies. Like me, he'd discovered that authentic partnership required more than surface compatibility. "I'm not looking for someone to complete me," he said as Nashville's skyline appeared ahead of us. "I spent too many years trying to be who someone else wanted me to be. Now I'm interested in finding someone who's complete on their own but enjoys sharing adventures with a fellow traveler." His words resonated with the self-sufficiency I'd fought to achieve after my divorce. The woman who defined herself through her relationship with Derek was gone, replaced by someone who'd built a meaningful career and satisfying life entirely through her own efforts. Any future romantic partnership would need to enhance rather than replace the fulfillment I'd found in my independence. We began spending time together in contexts that allowed our friendship to develop naturally before addressing romantic possibilities. Cameron attended my dinner parties, offering to help with food preparation and contributing to conversations about music and creativity. I visited recording sessions where he was producing albums, observing his collaborative process and learning about the technical aspects of bringing artistic visions to life. The transition from friendship to romance happened gradually, without the dramatic passion that had characterized my relationship with Derek, but with deeper foundation of mutual respect and shared values. Cameron courted me with the same patience he brought to crafting perfect album arrangements, understanding that meaningful relationships required time to develop properly. Our first official date was a concert by an elderly blues musician whose career Cameron was helping revive through a new album. Sitting in the dimly lit club, listening to songs about love and loss and redemption performed by someone who'd lived through decades of both triumph and heartbreak, I felt the rightness of being there with someone who understood that authentic artistry required both vulnerability and strength. "This is what I love about Nashville," Cameron said during a break between sets. "You can find profound truth being performed in rooms where most people are just looking for entertainment. The real magic happens when artists trust their audience enough to share something genuinely personal." His observation applied to more than just music. The real magic in relationships happen when people trusted each other enough to share their authentic selves, complete with flaws and fears and dreams that might seem foolish to others. After years of performing the version of myself I thought Derek wanted to see, the freedom to be completely honest with someone felt revolutionary. Cameron's integration into my life happened naturally, rather than dramatically. He became a regular at my dinner parties, contributing not just as my romantic partner, but as someone whose expertise and connections added value to the gatherings. Artists began specifically requesting his production input, and his collaboration with Crossroads Entertainment evolved into an informal partnership that benefited everyone involved. The relationship developed without the possessiveness or manipulation that had characterized my marriage. Cameron had his own career demands and creative projects that sometimes required travel or long hours in the studio. I had my marketing campaigns and artist development work that often meant late nights and weekend obligations.
Instead of competing for attention or creating guilt about professional priorities, we supported each other's ambitions and celebrated each other's successes. When Cameron was nominated for a Grammy for his work producing Jake Morrison's comeback album, I felt the same pride I experienced when my own campaigns succeeded. When I was profiled in music business worldwide as one of Nashville's most innovative marketers, Cameron's excitement matched my own. We'd become true partners in the sense that each other's victories felt like shared accomplishments. The Grammy nomination in Los Angeles felt like a culmination of everything I'd built since fleeing Portland 3 years earlier. Walking the red carpet with Cameron wearing a vintage-inspired gown that reflected my evolved sense of style, I felt completely comfortable in my own skin for the first time in years. The woman who'd discovered wedding brochures hidden in her husband's nightstand would never have imagined this moment. But the confident professional who'd helped Jake Morrison rebuild his career belonged exactly where she was. Jake didn't win the Grammy that night, losing to a major label artist whose album had dominated commercial radio, but the nomination itself had already transformed his career prospects. Record executives who'd previously ignored his work were now offering contract negotiations. Booking agents were planning tours that would take his music to international audiences. The authentic, emotional connection I'd helped him rediscover was being recognized at the industry's highest level. "None of this would have happened without your belief in the music," Jake told me at the after-party, his arm around the new girlfriend who'd fallen in love with both his songs and his story. "You saw something in those songs that I'd stopped seeing myself." His words reminded me of my own journey from self-doubt to self-confidence. The betrayal I'd experienced in Portland had temporarily convinced me that I wasn't worthy of loyalty or love, that my dreams and ambitions were less important than other people's needs. Nashville had proven that assessment wrong by giving me opportunities to demonstrate my actual value, rather than performing the diminished version of myself that others had demanded. Standing in that Los Angeles hotel ballroom, surrounded by music industry luminaries and celebrating artists whose careers I'd helped build, I realized that Derek and Natalie's betrayal had been the beginning of my real life, rather than the end of my old one. They'd unknowingly freed me from a marriage and friendships that were slowly suffocating my authentic self, launching me toward a life that exceeded anything I could have imagined while trapped in their toxic dynamic. The success felt complete, but not final. There were bigger projects ahead, more artists whose careers could benefit from strategic marketing that honored their creative integrity. Cameron and I were discussing the possibility of starting our own label, combining his production expertise with my marketing innovation to create something entirely new in Nashville's competitive landscape. But first, there was one more piece of business to handle. The letter had arrived at my office 3 weeks earlier, forwarded through several addresses before finding me in Nashville. The return address was Portland, Oregon, and the handwriting belonged to someone I'd once considered my best friend. Natalie Coleman, she'd taken Derek's name after stealing him from me. Reaching out after 4 years of silence felt like an intrusion from a past I'd successfully buried. Cameron noticed my distraction during our morning coffee routine, his producer's sensitivity to emotional undercurrents making him attuned to changes in my mood that others might miss. "Whatever's in that envelope has been bothering you since it arrived," he observed, setting down his mug and studying my face with the same careful attention he brought to mixing vocals. "Want to talk about it, or should I pretend I haven't noticed you staring at it like it might explode?" I appreciated his direct approach, the way he could acknowledge difficult situations without trying to manage my emotional response. The contrast with Derek's manipulative communication style remained stark even after all this time. Derek would have used my obvious distress as ammunition for complaints about my inability to let go of the past, while Cameron simply offered support without judgment about whatever decision I made. "It's from Natalie," I admitted, surprised by how strange her name sounded after years of not speaking it aloud. "My former best friend, who married my ex-husband. I can't imagine what she could possibly want after all this time." Cameron's expression shifted to protective concern, but he didn't immediately offer advice or try to influence my response. Instead, he asked the question that mattered most. "What do you want to do about it?" The question forced me to examine motivations I'd been avoiding. Part of me was curious about what crisis had prompted Natalie to reach out after years of silence. Another part wanted to simply destroy the letter unread, maintaining the clean separation I'd established between my old life and the new one I'd built in Nashville. The healthiest response was probably somewhere between those extremes. "I think I need to read it," I decided, reaching for the envelope with hands that were steadier than I'd expected.
The letter was handwritten on expensive stationery, Natalie's familiar script bringing back memories of college study sessions and late-night conversations about our dreams for the future. The irony was not lost on me that she was using the same elegant handwriting that had once addressed birthday cards and graduation congratulations to reach out from the wreckage of the life she'd stolen from me.
Dear Victoria, it began, using my full name in a way that felt oddly formal, coming from someone who'd once known all my secrets. I know I have no right to contact you after everything that happened, but I'm hoping you'll read this with an open mind. I've spent the past 4 years thinking about the way things ended between us, and I realize I need to take responsibility for the pain I caused. The acknowledgement of wrongdoing was more than I'd expected from someone who'd been so callously dismissive during our final confrontation in Portland. I continued reading with cautious interest, aware that I needed support, but not hovering anxiously. Derek and I are getting divorced, the letter continued, and I felt a flash of vindication that had nothing to do with romantic jealousy and everything to do with cosmic justice. I know you probably think I'm getting what I deserve. And maybe you're right, but I've learned some things about myself and about him that I wish I'd understood before I destroyed our friendship. The letter went on for 3 pages, detailing the gradual deterioration of Derek and Natalie's marriage with a level of insight that suggested genuine self-reflection. Derek's controlling behavior, which I'd attributed to stress and work pressure during our marriage, had intensified with Natalie until she felt completely diminished as a person. His criticism of her career, her appearance, her personality had followed the same pattern of systematic undermining that had nearly destroyed my self-confidence. He made me feel like I was lucky that someone like him would choose me, Natalie wrote, the words echoing sentiments I remembered feeling during the worst periods of my own marriage. It took me 3 years to realize that someone who truly loves you doesn't make you feel grateful for their attention. They feel grateful for yours. The revelation that Derek had repeated his manipulative patterns with Natalie didn't surprise me, but it did provide closure I hadn't realized I needed. Their betrayal had devastated me at the time, but it had also freed me from a relationship that would have continued eroding my self-worth until nothing remained of the confident woman I'd once been. Natalie had saved me from years of additional psychological damage by removing Derek from my life, though that certainly hadn't been her intention. The final section of the letter contained the request I'd been dreading. I know this is presumptuous, but I'd like to see you if you're willing. I'm not asking for forgiveness or trying to resurrect our friendship. I just want the chance to apologize in person and to tell you some things about Derek that you should know. If you don't want to see me, I understand completely. But if you're willing to give me one conversation, I promise I won't ask for anything more. She'd included her phone number and mentioned that she would be in Nashville the following month for a design conference, making it convenient for me to meet without traveling back to Portland. The timing felt deliberate, as if she'd researched my current location before planning her trip. The thought of seeing her again triggered anxiety I thought I'd completely processed, but also curiosity about what additional revelations she might share about our shared history. She wants to meet, I told Cameron, handing him the letter so he could understand the full context. Part of me thinks it's a terrible idea, but another part wants to hear what she has to say. Cameron read the entire letter carefully, his expression thoughtful rather than immediately reactive. When he finished, he set it down and considered his response with the same deliberation he brought to important production decisions. What's the worst thing that could happen if you meet with her? And what's the worst thing that could happen if you don't? The questions helped me analyze the situation strategically rather than purely emotionally. Meeting with Natalie might reopen wounds I thought had healed, but it might also provide closure that would prevent her from continuing to occupy mental space I'd rather dedicate to current priorities. Refusing to meet might leave me wondering about her revelations, and whether avoiding the conversation was motivated by strength or lingering fear. I think I'm strong enough now to handle whatever she wants to tell me, and if she's genuinely trying to make amends, maybe I owe it to the friendship we used to have to hear her out. Cameron nodded approvingly.
Just remember that you're under no obligation to forgive her or resume any kind of relationship. You can listen to what she has to say and still decide that chapter of your life is permanently closed. His support without pressure helped me make the decision with confidence rather than anxiety. I would meet with Natalie, but on my terms and in my territory, with the clear understanding that one conversation wouldn't erase years of betrayal or reestablish trust that had been deliberately shattered. I called the number in her letter that evening, reaching voicemail that played a greeting in the professional tone she'd always used for business calls. Her voice sounded older, more subdued than the animated friend I remembered from our college years. I left a brief message agreeing to meet during her Nashville visit, suggesting a coffee shop in downtown that would provide neutral territory for our conversation. She called back within hours, her relief at my willingness to meet evident even through the careful control she maintained over her tone. We arranged to meet at Frothy Monkey on a Tuesday afternoon when I could easily return to work afterward, giving me a built-in excuse to limit the conversation's duration if needed. The weeks leading up to her visit passed quickly, filled with projects that demanded my complete attention and left little time for anxious speculation about what revelations awaited. Jake Morrison's new album was exceeding sales projections, generating industry buzz that was attracting attention from major labels interested in acquiring his contract. Cameron and I were collaborating on production and marketing strategies that could position him for national success while preserving the artistic integrity that made his music special. The work reminded me how completely my life had evolved since fleeing Portland.
The woman who discovered wedding brochures in her husband's nightstand had been focused on salvaging a failing marriage and struggling to maintain a small marketing business. The woman preparing for a conversation with her former best friend was a successful entrepreneur with equity in a thriving entertainment company, professional recognition throughout Nashville's music industry, and a romantic partnership built on mutual respect and shared ambitions. The transformation made Natalie's betrayal feel like ancient history rather than recent trauma. She'd unknowingly launched me toward a life that exceeded anything I could have achieved while trapped in the toxic dynamics of my Portland existence. Whatever pain she'd caused had been temporary. The growth it had catalyzed was permanent and ongoing. Tuesday afternoon arrived gray and drizzly, Nashville's weather matching the complicated emotions I felt about revisiting my past. I arrived at Frothy Monkey 15 minutes early, claiming a corner table that would provide privacy for our conversation while allowing me to observe Natalie's approach. The coffee shop's eclectic decor and diverse clientele reflected Nashville's creative energy, a sharp contrast to the sterile chain restaurants where Derek and I had conducted most of our relationship conversations. Natalie appeared precisely on time, her appearance both familiar and changed in ways that suggested the past 4 years hadn't been entirely kind to her. She was thinner than I remembered, her face carrying stress lines that hadn't been there during our friendship. Her clothing was elegant but conservative, the creative flair she'd once expressed through bold fashion choices replaced by professional anonymity. She spotted me immediately, her step faltering slightly as she took in the confident woman I'd become. I realized she was probably seeing changes in me too. The professional wardrobe, the assured posture, the serene expression of someone who'd found her place in the world. The contrast between my obvious prosperity and her subdued demeanor would have been satisfying if I'd still needed validation from her recognition of my success. "Victoria," she said as she approached my table, my name carrying weight of shared history and acknowledged guilt. "Thank you for agreeing to see me. You look incredible." The compliment felt genuine rather than manipulative, delivered with the kind of rueful admiration that suggested she understood how completely I'd succeeded in rebuilding my life. I gestured to the chair across from me, noting that she waited for my invitation before sitting down. "You said you had things to tell me about Derek," I said, choosing directness over small talk that would only prolong the discomfort we both felt. "I'm curious to hear what you've learned." Natalie ordered coffee from the server who approached our table, her hands trembling slightly as she lifted the mug. The nervous energy was unfamiliar coming from someone who'd once been the most self-assured person I knew, suggesting that whatever had happened in her marriage had shaken her confidence as thoroughly as Derek's manipulation had once shaken mine. "I need you to know that Derek pursued me, not the other way around," she began, her voice barely above a whisper.
I'm not saying that to excuse what I did because I made the choice to respond to his attention, but I want you to understand that he orchestrated the entire situation. The revelation didn't surprise me. Derek's calculating approach to relationships had become clear during our marriage's final months. But hearing confirmation from Natalie provided validation I hadn't realized I still needed. He told me you were growing apart, that you'd lost interest in physical intimacy and were completely focused on your business, she continued, meeting my eyes directly for the first time since sitting down. The lies were exactly what I would have expected Derek to tell, painting himself as the neglected husband rather than the manipulative partner who had been systematically underlining his wife's confidence. His ability to rewrite history to cast himself as the victim had been one of his most destructive talents. I believed him because I wanted to, Natalie admitted with painful honesty. I'd been attracted to Derek since college, and when he started paying attention to me, I convinced myself that your marriage was already over and that I was just giving him the support he wasn't getting at home. Her confession revealed layers of self-deception that went beyond simple romantic competition. She'd constructed an elaborate justification for her betrayal that allowed her to see herself as Derek's rescuer rather than my betrayer. The psychological gymnastics required to maintain that narrative must have been exhausting. When did you realize he'd been lying? I asked, genuinely curious about what had finally opened her eyes to Derek's true character. Natalie's laugh was bitter, carrying years of accumulated disappointment. About 6 months after we got married, he started treating me exactly the same way he'd treated you toward the end, criticizing everything I did, making me feel like I was never good enough, isolating me from friends and family who might question his behavior. She described a pattern of psychological abuse that mirrored my own experience but had escalated more quickly, as if Derek had become more skilled at manipulation through practice. He'd convinced her to move across the country for a job opportunity that had never materialized, leaving her without support systems in a city where she knew no one. He'd criticized her graphic design work until she'd stopped pursuing new clients, making her financially dependent on his income. He'd gradually cut off her contact with family members by creating conflict over imagined slights and forgotten occasions. The worst part, she said, tears flowing freely now, was realizing that everything he'd told me about you was probably a lie. If he could rewrite our marriage so completely, what had he said about yours? The question revealed the heart of why she'd reached out to me. She needed confirmation that Derek's revisionist history of our relationship was false, that her betrayal had destroyed something real rather than simply hastening the end of something already broken. The truth would make her actions more reprehensible, but also more meaningful.
Our marriage had problems, I admitted, choosing honesty over the easier path of complete vindication. We'd grown apart in some ways, and I was probably more focused on work than on nurturing our relationship. But we weren't growing apart because I'd lost interest in him. We were growing apart because he was already emotionally involved with you. Natalie closed her eyes, absorbing the confirmation of what she'd suspected. He used my feelings for him to destroy both our lives, she said quietly. And I let him do it because I was too selfish to see past what I thought I wanted. The acknowledgement of her role in our mutual destruction felt like the apology I'd never expected to receive. Not just recognition of the pain she'd caused, but understanding of how Derek had manipulated both of us to achieve his desired outcome. We'd been pawns in his game, rather than willing participants in a love triangle. There's something else, Natalie continued, reaching into her purse for an envelope that looked official and legal. Derek's been telling people that he left you for me because you were unstable, possibly bipolar, and that your business was failing because of your mental health issues. I wanted you to know what he's been saying so you could protect yourself if necessary. The defamation was worse than I'd expected, but not entirely surprising given Derek's need to justify his actions through victim blaming. The irony that he was accusing me of instability while systematically destroying the mental health of both women he'd claimed to love wasn't lost on either of us. I documented everything, she continued, sliding the envelope across the table. Text messages where he admits to lying about you, emails where he describes his manipulation strategies, even recordings of conversations where he brags about how easily he controlled both of us. If you ever need legal protection from his lies, you'll have evidence. The envelope felt heavy with the weight of documented betrayal, evidence of Derek's calculated cruelty that went beyond simple infidelity into deliberate character assassination. The gift was unexpected and valuable, providing insurance against future attacks on my reputation or mental health. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked, genuinely puzzled by her willingness to provide ammunition that could be used against her as well as Derek. "Because you deserved better than what both of us gave you," she replied simply. "I can't undo the damage we caused, but I can try to prevent him from causing more. Derek is pathological, Victoria. He destroys people for sport, and he's probably already targeting his next victim." The warning carried weight, coming from someone who'd experienced Derek's manipulation firsthand. Natalie had paid the price for her betrayal by becoming his next victim, learning too late that men who cheat with you will eventually cheat on you, and that partners who help you destroy someone else's life will eventually help someone else destroy yours. We talked for another hour, filling in details of our parallel experiences with Derek's psychological abuse and sharing stories that confirmed patterns we'd each thought were unique to our individual relationships. The conversation was therapeutic for both of us, providing context that helped explain decisions that had seemed incomprehensible when viewed in isolation. As our meeting drew to a close, Natalie made one final request. "I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, and I'm not expecting us to be friends again, but I hope someday you can find peace with what happened, not for my sake, but for yours." The request for peace rather than forgiveness showed wisdom that hadn't been present in the manipulative woman who'd stolen my husband. She understood that true healing didn't require absolving people who'd wronged you, just releasing the anger that could poison your own happiness. "I found peace years ago," I told her honestly. "Your betrayal hurt terribly at the time, but it also freed me from a life that was slowly killing who I really was. I'm grateful for that freedom, even though I'll never be grateful for how I got it." Natalie nodded, understanding the distinction between forgiveness and gratitude. "I'm glad you found happiness," she said as we prepared to part ways. "You always deserved so much better than what Derek and I gave you." Walking back to my office after our meeting, I felt the lightness from finally closing a chapter that had been left partially open. Seeing Natalie again had confirmed what I'd suspected, that Derek's manipulation had been systematic and deliberate, that both of us had been victims of his psychological games, and that the life I'd built in Nashville was infinitely better than anything I could have achieved while trapped in his toxic orbit. Cameron was waiting in my apartment when I returned that evening, having prepared dinner and opened a bottle of wine to mark what he understood was a significant milestone in my healing process. His presence felt like coming home to safety after venturing briefly back into dangerous territory. "How did it go?" he asked, pulling me into an embrace that reminded me how completely I had been loved and valued since leaving Portland behind. "Better than I expected," I admitted, settling beside him on the couch that had become our favorite spot for processing complex emotions. "She gave me closure I didn't know I still needed, and confirmation that Derek is exactly as pathological as we suspected." I told him about Natalie's revelations, Derek's pattern of abuse, and the evidence she'd provided to protect me from future character assassination.
Cameron listened with the same careful attention he brought to mixing vocals, asking thoughtful questions that helped me process the experience fully. "Are you glad you met with her?" he asked when I'd finished recounting our conversation. "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "Not because I forgive her or want any kind of relationship with her, but because I needed to see that the life I built here is real and permanent. Derek and Natalie can't touch what we've created together, no matter what lies they tell about the past." Cameron smiled, raising his wineglass in a toast to resilience and growth. "To second chances," he said, "and to the wisdom to recognize when someone's betrayal is actually a gift." The toast felt like the perfect end to a chapter I was finally ready to close completely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, artists to develop and campaigns to create, a future built on authentic relationships and genuine achievements. The past had been laid to rest with all the ceremony it deserved, which was to say, none at all. 2 years after my meeting with Natalie, Cameron and I had turned our professional collaboration into something extraordinary. Wells Hayes Productions had launched with 3 artists who'd left major labels to work with us, drawn by our reputation for prioritizing artistic integrity while achieving commercial success. Our roster was small but mighty, each artist handpicked for their unique voice and commitment to authentic storytelling. The company operated out of a restored Victorian mansion in East Nashville that we'd converted into offices and recording spaces. The building's history as a gathering place for musicians felt appropriate for our mission of creating meaningful art in an industry increasingly dominated by algorithmic formulas and manufactured personalities. Jake Morrison had become our flagship artist, his career trajectory serving as proof that authentic emotional connection could translate to sustainable commercial success. His latest album had debuted in the top 10 of the country charts, earned 2 Grammy nominations, and generated a sold-out tour that would keep him on the road for 8 months. More importantly, his success had attracted other artists who wanted to work with people who understood that longevity required more than viral moments. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in spring, delivered by courier to ensure I received it personally. The envelope was elegant but not ostentatious. Cream-colored paper with my name written in calligraphy that suggested expense without showiness. Inside, the invitation revealed that Derek Coleman and Natalie Brooks Coleman were renewing their vows in a ceremony that would celebrate their love and commitment to each other. The irony was staggering. The couple who destroyed my marriage through infidelity was now staging a public affirmation of their devotion, apparently having convinced themselves and their social circle that their relationship was worth celebrating. The invitation included a handwritten note from Natalie. I know this might seem strange after our conversation in Nashville, but Derek convinced me that renewing our vows would help us start fresh. I'd understand if you don't want to come, but part of me hopes you will. It would mean a lot to have closure for all of us. The request was audacious beyond comprehension. Natalie wanted me to attend the ceremony celebrating her marriage to the man she'd helped her steal from me, framing my presence as some kind of healing gesture that would benefit everyone involved. The psychological manipulation was so transparent, it was almost insulting. Cameron found me in our kitchen, staring at the invitation with a mixture of disbelief and grim amusement. His expression shifted to protective concern as he read over my shoulder, his arms settling around my waist in a gesture that had become automatic whenever difficult emotions surfaced. They want you to attend their vow renewal, he said, his tone carefully neutral despite what I knew was probably volcanic anger beneath the surface. That's either the most manipulative thing I've ever heard, or they're completely delusional about what closure means. The invitation felt like the final test of the peace I'd claimed to find with their betrayal. Refusing to attend would be the safe choice, maintaining the boundaries I'd established and avoiding unnecessary drama. But something about their audacity sparked a different impulse, a desire to demonstrate just how completely I'd moved beyond their ability to hurt or manipulate me anymore. I think I want to go, I heard myself say, surprising both of us with the certainty in my voice. Not to celebrate their marriage or provide them with absolution, but to show myself that they have no power over my emotional equilibrium anymore. Cameron studied my face with the careful attention he brought to evaluating artist demos, looking for signs of self-deception or unprocessed anger that might make attending dangerous to my well-being. What he found seemed to satisfy him because he nodded slowly. If you want to go, I'll go with you, he said simply, but we're not staying for the reception, and we're leaving the moment you feel uncomfortable. This is about you proving something to yourself, not about giving them what they want. The wedding was scheduled for the first Saturday in June, at the same Portland venue where Derek and I had celebrated our rehearsal dinner 7 years earlier. The symbolism was either deliberately cruel or unconsciously revealing, suggesting that Derek's capacity for rewriting history extended to claiming our shared memories as the foundation for his new beginning. We flew to Portland the day before the ceremony, staying at a boutique hotel downtown that was far enough from my old neighborhood to avoid triggering unwanted memories. The city looked exactly as I'd left it 5 years earlier, but my perspective had changed so dramatically that familiar landmarks felt like tourist attractions rather than pieces of my personal history. Walking through Pioneer Courthouse Square with Cameron's hand in mine, I felt the strange sensation of being a visitor to my former life. The coffee shops where Derek and I had spent Sunday mornings, the galleries where I'd once dreamed of exhibiting my abandoned art, the restaurants where Natalie and I had dissected our hopes and fears. They were all still there, but they belonged to someone else's story now.
How does it feel being back? Cameron asked as we settled at a sidewalk cafe for lunch, the same one where I'd once met clients during my struggling marketing days. Like visiting a museum of who I used to be, I admitted, watching pedestrians navigate sidewalks I'd once known by heart. Not painful, just distant, like looking at photographs of someone you knew long ago but don't particularly miss. The detachment felt healthy rather than defensive, evidence of genuine healing rather than emotional suppression. The woman who'd fled Portland in desperate escape had been replaced by someone who could return as a curious observer, secure in her own identity and immune to the power her former life might once have wielded. Saturday morning brought unseasonably warm weather for early June, the kind of perfect day that wedding planners prayed for, and that would probably be interpreted by Derek and Natalie as cosmic approval of their union. I'd chosen my outfit carefully, a sophisticated navy dress that looked expensive without being flashy, paired with jewelry Cameron had given me that carried sentimental value rather than material ostentation. The goal was to look successful and content without appearing to compete for attention on what was supposed to be their special day. I wanted my presence to communicate quiet confidence rather than dramatic confrontation, demonstrating that I'd achieved something they couldn't touch or diminish through their opinions or reactions. Cameron looked devastatingly handsome in his charcoal suit, his natural elegance making him stand out among the Portland social scene without trying. Several people had already noticed us during our brief exploration of the city, their curious glances suggesting they recognized me but couldn't quite place where they knew me from. The venue was exactly as I remembered it, an elegant garden space with panoramic views of the Columbia River, the kind of location that photographed beautifully and created lasting memories for couples beginning their lives together. The irony that Derek and Natalie were using it to celebrate a relationship built on betrayal wasn't lost on me, but it no longer carried emotional weight. We arrived precisely on time, neither early enough to suggest eagerness, nor late enough to create disruption. The guest list appeared to be a mixture of Portland social climbers and people I recognized from my former life, mutual friends who'd apparently decided to embrace Derek and Natalie's narrative rather than question the ethics of their courtship. Several people noticed my entrance, whispered conversations suggesting that my presence was unexpected and generating speculation about my motivations for attending. I felt their attention without being bothered by it, secure enough in my own intentions to ignore whatever conclusions they might draw. The ceremony itself was a masterpiece of revisionist history, with vows that emphasized their commitment to honesty and communication, their gratitude for finding each other when they needed love most, and their excitement about building a future based on mutual respect and understanding. The words were exactly what you'd expect from people trying to convince themselves that their relationship's foundation was solid rather than built on lies and manipulation. Derek looked older than his years, stress lines and a slight paunch, suggesting that his marriage to Natalie hadn't been the effortless happiness he'd probably expected. Natalie appeared beautiful but brittle, her smile bright enough for photographs but lacking the genuine joy that should characterize someone celebrating renewed commitment to their soulmate. They were performing happiness rather than experiencing it, going through motions that looked convincing from a distance but revealed their falseness to anyone paying close attention. The contrast with my own contentment was stark and unmistakable, at least to me.
The officiant asked if anyone had reasons why Derek and Natalie shouldn't renew their commitment to each other, the traditional question that was supposed to be rhetorical in modern ceremonies. For a moment, I considered the poetic justice of standing up and detailing exactly why their marriage was a fraud built on betrayal and psychological manipulation. Instead, I remained seated, understanding that my silence was more powerful than any accusation I could make. They were creating their own consequences through choices that would inevitably reveal their true nature to each other and everyone around them. My intervention wasn't necessary for justice to be served. After the ceremony, guests mingled on the garden terrace while Derek and Natalie posed for a photograph that would probably grace their social media profiles for years to come. Several people approached me with barely concealed curiosity, their questions ranging from subtle to outrageously direct. "Victoria Hayes," said Margaret Thornton, a woman who'd been peripherally involved in my former social circle. "I was so surprised to see you here. How do you know the happy couple?" The question was loaded with implications, an attempt to get me to reveal whether my presence indicated forgiveness, lingering attachment, or more complicated motivations. I smiled pleasantly, offering the response I'd prepared for exactly this situation. Derek and I were married briefly years ago, ancient history, but I thought it was nice of them to invite me to celebrate their happiness. The response provided just enough information to satisfy curiosity while revealing nothing about my actual feelings or circumstances. Margaret's expression suggested she'd hoped for something more dramatic, but she couldn't push for details without appearing rude. Other conversations followed similar patterns, people fishing for signs of drama or emotional distress that never materialized. My calm demeanor and obvious contentment seemed to disappoint guests who'd probably attended partly for this spectacle of seeing how the discarded ex-wife would handle her replacement's moment of triumph. Cameron remained beside me throughout these interactions, his presence serving as subtle indication that I'd moved on completely from whatever history I shared with the wedding couple. His natural charm and obvious devotion to me created a contrast with Derek that couldn't have been more flattering if I'd planned it deliberately. The moment I'd unconsciously been waiting for arrived when Derek finally approached me during the cocktail hour, leaving Natalie engaged in conversation with her bridesmaids, while he crossed the terrace with determined steps. His expression was carefully composed, but couldn't hide the uncertainty behind his eyes. "Victoria," he said, extending his hand for a formal shake that felt absurd, given our intimate history. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come. Thank you for being here."
His gratitude felt performative, the kind of gracious gesture that looked good to observers but lacked genuine feeling. Up close, I could see that the years since our divorce hadn't been kind to him. His face carried the pinched look of someone under constant stress, and his eyes held the slightly desperate quality of a man trying to convince himself that his choices had been correct. "Congratulations on your renewal," I replied with polite warmth that contained no trace of sarcasm or hidden meaning. The ceremony was lovely. Derek seemed prepared for anger or passive-aggressive commentary, my genuine pleasantness clearly disarming him in ways that hostility never could have. He glanced toward Cameron, who was maintaining respectful distance while remaining obviously protective. "Is this your husband?" Derek asked, the question carrying undertones I couldn't quite identify. "This is Cameron Wells," I confirmed, gesturing for Cameron to join us. "We're partners in business and in life." The introduction was deliberately vague about our legal status, while making clear that our connection was both professional and personal. Cameron's handshake with Derek was firm and brief, his expression pleasant, but not warm. "I've heard amazing things about your work in Nashville," Derek said, his tone suggesting he'd researched my current life more thoroughly than casual interest would explain. "The music industry seems to be treating you well." The comment revealed more than he probably intended.
Derek had been following my career, tracking my success in ways that suggested my departure from his life hadn't provided the clean closure he'd probably expected. Nashville has been very good to us, I agreed. Noting his slight flinch at my use of the plural pronoun, we've found our tribe among people who value authenticity and artistic integrity. The words were chosen carefully to contrast our current situation with the manipulative dynamics that had characterized my Portland relationships. Derek was intelligent enough to understand the implication, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly. "Well," he said after a pause that lasted slightly too long, "I'm glad you found happiness. That's all any of us really want, isn't it?" The platitude felt like a retreat. Derek, recognizing that continued conversation might reveal more about his current dissatisfaction than was wise to share with his ex-wife and her obviously successful partner. He excused himself to return to his hosting duties, leaving me with the satisfying knowledge that my presence had achieved exactly what I'd hoped. Natalie approached me shortly afterward, her approach more tentative than Derek's had been. She looked beautiful in her renewal dress, but her smile carried the same brittle quality I'd noticed during the ceremony. "I can't believe you actually came," she said, her voice mixing gratitude with something that might have been relief. "I was afraid you'd think the invitation was some kind of manipulation." The irony of her concern about appearing manipulative wasn't lost on either of us, given that manipulation had been the foundation of her relationship with Derek from the beginning. Her awareness of how the invitation might be interpreted suggested more self-knowledge than she'd displayed during our Nashville meeting. "I came because I wanted to. Not for your benefit or Derek's, but because I wanted to prove to myself that this chapter of my life is completely closed." Natalie studied my face, searching for signs of hidden pain or unresolved anger that might indicate ongoing emotional investment in their relationship. What she found seemed to satisfy her that my presence wasn't motivated by lingering attachment or desire for revenge. "You look incredibly happy," she said with what sounded like genuine observation rather than polite compliment. "The life you've built in Nashville seems perfect for you." The comment acknowledged what we both understood, that fleeing Portland ultimately benefited me more than staying would have. Her betrayal had freed me from a marriage that was slowly eroding my authentic self, launching me toward opportunities I never could have imagined while trapped in Derek's psychological manipulation. "It is perfect for me," I agreed, without false modesty or apologetic qualification. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us turn out to be exactly what we needed, even when we can't see it at the time. Natalie's expression shifted to something that might have been envy or regret, her gaze moving to Cameron and back to me with obvious longing for the contentment she observed in my demeanor. Her own happiness looked increasingly forced as the day progressed, a performance that was becoming harder to maintain. "I should let you get back to your celebration," I said, sensing that prolonging our conversation would only make her more aware of what she'd sacrificed for a relationship that clearly wasn't providing the fulfillment she'd expected. The reception continued with speeches that praised Derek and Natalie's devotion, while carefully avoiding any mention of how their relationship had begun. Friends and family members offered toasts celebrating their commitment, while diplomatically ignoring the elephant in the room. That marriages built on betrayal rarely provided the solid foundation necessary for lasting happiness. Cameron and I stayed through dinner, but left before dancing began, our departure time to avoid seeming rude while honoring my commitment to protecting my emotional equilibrium. Several guests noticed our exit, but no one tried to convince us to stay longer. Walking to our rental car under Portland's early evening sky, I felt the profound satisfaction of having faced my past from a position of complete strength.
The woman who'd discovered wedding brochures in her husband's nightstand would never have imagined returning to celebrate the people who'd betrayed her, but the confident professional who'd built a successful entertainment company could afford to be gracious toward people who no longer had the power to hurt her. "How do you feel?" Cameron asked as we drove back toward our hotel, the venue disappearing in our rearview mirror like a chapter finally closed. "Like I passed a test I didn't know I was taking," I replied, settling back in my seat with deep contentment. They tried so hard to convince everyone, including themselves, that their marriage is built on true love rather than mutual manipulation. But you could see the cracks if you knew what to look for. Cameron nodded, having observed the same brittle performance quality in their interactions throughout the day. "They're going to make each other miserable," he said, with the matter-of-fact tone of someone stating an obvious truth. "Derek's need to control will eventually clash with Natalie's need to feel special, and neither of them has the emotional maturity to handle conflict constructively." His prediction felt accurate based on what I'd observed during our brief interactions with them. Derek hadn't changed since our divorce. He was still the manipulative narcissist who needed to be the center of his partner's universe while offering minimal emotional support in return. Natalie had gained some self-awareness through her failed marriage, but not enough to prevent her from making the same mistakes with the same man who nearly destroyed her the first time. The flight back to Nashville the next morning carried us away from my past and toward the future Cameron and I were building together. Our entertainment company had artists to develop, projects to plan, and dreams to pursue that had nothing to do with the people who'd briefly intersected with my story years earlier. 3 months later, the news reached me through Lauren, who'd maintained loose connections with Portland's creative community despite her frequent travels. Derek and Natalie were divorcing again, their renewed commitment having lasted less than 6 months before their fundamental incompatibility reasserted itself. The details Lauren shared weren't entirely surprising. Derek had resumed his pattern of criticism and control, while Natalie had begun another affair with someone who promised to appreciate her in ways Derek never could. The cycle was repeating with different players, but identical dynamics, proving that neither of them had learned from their previous mistakes. "I almost feel sorry for them," I told Cameron when I shared the news, and realized I genuinely meant it. They're trapped in patterns they don't understand, hurting each other and everyone around them because they can't see beyond their immediate desires. My pity was pure rather than self-serving, motivated by genuine sadness for people who were sabotaging their own chances at happiness through choices they seemed powerless to change. The emotional distance I felt from their drama confirmed that my healing was complete. Cameron and I celebrated our 5th anniversary that fall with a small ceremony in our Nashville garden, surrounded by the artists and industry friends who'd become our chosen family. The gathering was intimate rather than elaborate, focused on the authentic connections we'd built rather than impressing people whose opinions didn't matter. Jake Morrison performed the song we'd written together during that first retreat, his voice carrying the same emotional honesty that had made it powerful years earlier. The lyrics about discovering strength through betrayal and finding joy in unexpected places felt like prophecy fulfilled rather than wishful thinking. Standing beside Cameron as our friends raised glasses to toast our partnership, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. The woman who discovered wedding brochures in her husband's nightstand could never have imagined the life I was now living. But she'd possessed the courage to leave everything behind when staying would have meant slow emotional death. Derek and Natalie's betrayal had been devastating at the time, but it had also been liberation disguised as destruction. Their cruelty had freed me from relationships that were poisoning my authentic self, launching me toward opportunities that exceeded anything I could have achieved while trapped in their toxic dynamic. The best revenge I'd learned wasn't making them suffer for their choices. It was building a life so fulfilling that their betrayal transformed from devastating loss into unexpected gift. They'd wanted me gone so they could claim the life we'd built together, but instead, they'd launched me toward a life that was entirely my own. Looking around at the celebration of genuine love and authentic achievement, I felt profound gratitude for the betrayal that seemed so catastrophic years earlier. Without their cruelty, I might never have discovered what I was capable of building when surrounded by people who valued my worth rather than exploiting my vulnerabilities. The future stretched ahead, filled with possibilities neither Derek nor Natalie could touch or diminish. Artists to develop, music to create, and a partnership to nurture that was built on mutual respect rather than manipulation. Their chapter in my story had ended with their secret wedding, but my real story was just beginning.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.